I thought I'd do a nice, relaxing art video showing 3 different paintings I did recently in Procreate on my iPad Pro. This first one is a half-hour art challenge where I paint a mandarin duck. I use a few tips and tricks, including color picking and doing some line-up measurements, as you can see here. However, art is representation, not duplication, and I was trying to make it representative, not one-to-one exact. I tried to get the entire painting done in the time frame, and I was more focused on making it feel like it looked like it, rather than getting the exact representation. I also did all this sketchy line art and this gray shading on the same layer, and then I did the colors on a layer underneath that layer. I then did another color layer on top of the sketch layer. Some things were painted through to be seen, while some stuff was painted on top to cover. I wanted a certain amount of line art to show through in the final art, but I didn't want it to be the same as a normal outlined or inked line art. I ended up noticing a few things I did accidentally, such as making the duck's head and eye too big, but I actually think that makes it look better. I tend to always like large eyes on things, and I always tend to seem to make the head a little bit bigger. I also didn't line the legs or feet up quite correctly to the bottom of the belly, and it seems like I made the bottom of the belly a little bit too small. I'm very happy with how it turned out anyway, because I enjoy the painting itself. Plus, as I said, it wasn't supposed to be absolutely perfect, it was just a nice, quick study I did to enjoy Procreate and to practice doing a realistic, but not 100% perfect mandarin duck. I also did the background layer behind the sketch layer. Here I'm just adding some final details, highlights, and darkening some shadows. Next, I do this Critical Role fan art of the character Jester. She's one of the main characters, played by Laura Bailey, in Campaign 2 of Critical Role. I decided to do a quick Jester painting here because I was trying out certain brushes and art styles. I was trying to do a certain style of art with this picture, as well as doing a fan art in general. I had this brush I thought would be really good for hair, and that was the main inspiration to do this painting, which is probably why I'm painting the hair first, now that I think about it. On a layer all its own, I continue using that textured brush I painted the hair with, which I used for most of this painting. I thought it would be fun to unify it by mostly using one brush. I create this entire horn on its own layer so I can duplicate it and create the opposite horn by flipping it and then merging down. On its own layer underneath the hair, I start painting the skin. The sketch layer is actually on top but made semi-transparent. Either that or I painted the painting on top of the sketch layer. No, I think I made the sketch layer semi-transparent on top. At any rate, it was on its own layer and used more as a guide than for the finalized art. I made sure to carefully select the colors based on colors I think Jester would wear and things similar to existing outfits. The outfit she's wearing here, however, is actually not an exact outfit from the show, but I did include the small ruby necklace. I'm using a particularly textured brush because I wanted to try that brush out to see if it would work really well for a whole painting, especially for the hair. And I think I did a fairly good job, and I'm quite proud of this artwork actually. Partway through, I realized I definitely wanted to add in a hamster unicorn. I also realized I probably should have painted the eyes in sooner so it wouldn't look quite as creepy, but being able to see the line art makes it look less creepy. Every time I turn the line art layer off here in order to get some details in without being distracted by it, I think it looks scarier, however. I gotta keep that in mind and maybe fill in the eyes earlier. More often than not, I do fill in the eyes a bit earlier along in the process. While working on this, I made sure that I didn't overwork it. I wanted to make sure it looked like it had implied detail due to the texture of the brushes, and I wanted to have a certain amount of line art implied without having any full line art in this piece. I also went over areas to make sure the blending and shading and highlights was more to my liking, rather than settling for what I'd already painted. Very soon, I'm going to add in the hamster unicorns. But I also used a few specialty brushes aside from the one brush. I used a special freckle brush, for example, and for a little bit of the shading, I used a large, soft airbrush I downloaded for free, and simply changed the opacity and increased the size. Remember, adjusting brush opacity and brush size is extremely helpful. Here, on its own layer, I'm working on a hamster unicorn. I start by painting in the flats and the general idea, but then I realize I want to see things better. So I start sketching in a sketchy line art version of the details. I also used a soft airbrush and some other soft brushes to help add reflected glowing pink light coming off of the hamster unicorn. My original plan was to have one, but I decided it would look better with two when I stepped back and look at the art. Here I'm going behind everything to add a more interesting textured background in. The hamster unicorns are part of a spell called Spirit Guardians, a magical spell that Jester is able to do. It's quite a good spell from 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons, which is the game system used in the live stream for Critical Role. I think Jester is a very fun and very typical chaotic neutral character. She very much typifies the chaotic neutral alignment, which makes her neither truly good nor evil, but a very fun, happy-go-lucky, candy-loving agent of chaos. And I find Jester is always fun to paint, which is why I decided to use her as the subject for this piece where I worked on this art style and practiced with this new brush. I also used a separate new brush to work on the texture in the background. This was after Procreate 5 was updated from the previous edition. For this artwork, I took an old line art I did from a couple years ago. Might have been 3 years ago. Here I photographed it, then imported it, lowered the opacity, and now on a layer above that, I'm doing a good line art. As you can see, I changed a couple of the details. The fabric behind the far foot, or rather, the near foot, was too much mirroring the boot, so I switched it into a different position. I also went back over everything to darken some of the lines, and once it was its own layer, I used that to create flats. For the transparent sections of her outfit, I did the transparent part on its own layer. I also did the line art for the glowy magic in her hands on its own layer, and I will eventually color those in as well. The main color flats for everything but the transparent scarf-like sections are on their own layer. I'm working in a particular style here where I'm trying not to do too many shadows, but I still want shading in it. Sometimes I'm doing more fine details in this artwork, and at other moments I'm doing larger areas. I'm using some of the new textured brushes in this, and I'm also using other brushes I downloaded before. This was also done so I could have a rough copy, this being the rough copy, though I'm very happy with how it worked out, so that I could print this out later and actually use it as a reference for when doing a watercolor painted version of this artwork. It was very important to me that I had a color reference for the watercolor before I did it, because what I was imagining was fairly specific, and having the reference first would make it much easier. Digitally, you can make corrections very easily, but traditionally, it's very difficult. I figured as well, if I practiced painting it first digitally, it would be easier to do so traditionally. I also decided to do this digital painting because I particularly like this old artwork I'm redoing, and I decided I might even want to paint it twice, digital and traditional, and I could compare the differences between the different mediums. I still haven't finished the watercolor version, but I've painted her outfit in and her skin's base tone. Here I'm doing the glows on its own layer, and I did a color dodge layer on top of the flatted for the color glows, and here I am adjusting that. I also add color dodge soft brushes in to get some reflected light from the glows. I also have to decide exactly what I'm going to do for the background as I continue along in this painting. I ended up deciding not to put a bunch of shading on the wings, even though they should have some, because I felt I could imply that they were ever so softly luminescent, which makes the whole thing more magical. I do like the black line art version, but I decided at this point that I'd much rather do color holds. I used the alpha lock function in Procreate so that anywhere I painted on that layer would only be where I'd already put marks down, so that I could paint just over the line art to get it all in its own colors. And here's the final result. I hope you enjoyed this happy little video, and if you would like more videos from me, please hit that like and subscribe button, and consider leaving a suggestion soon so that I can take that into consideration. Thank you.